Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software faster and better.
If you're looking to build a testing ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
You're listening to episode 11 of season 2. I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI. Today, I'm joined by Kim Lewandowski, founder of Chainguard.
Hey, Rob.
I'm so excited. Kim, thanks for joining me. Hello. I'm super jazzed. I think the stuff that you're doing, both in terms of software supply chain, which we care a lot about here at CircleCI, I care a lot about personally, and security is fascinating. And so the intersection of those things, I'm super excited to learn about. I think that probably more people need to know about. So also happy to share it. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, you bet. So let's jump right in. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, just Chainguard in general and the specific problem that you're trying to solve. As I said, I think the intersection is something that probably not a ton of people think about, but I kind of want them to because it's pretty fascinating and obviously growing in
scary
I want to
ways.
say popularity, but it's like it's the kind of popularity that we don't want.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, totally. Sure. So we started Chainguard almost a year ago, back in October, and so we're a new tech startup. There's actually 5 of us founders. We've grown the team pretty quickly. I think we're close to 50 people now, which is pretty crazy. Wow. And we were previously all at Google, and we worked on a lot of different things, mostly in the developer tooling, cloud space, Kubernetes, all that good stuff. And then started to work on more CI/CD related stuff, similar to CircleCI, and then started to look at it with a security lens and trying to help protect like Google from open source software and supply chain security risks. So then we all sort of came together last summer and said, hey, should we start a company? And we're like, yeah, let's do it. And then here we are almost a year later. And so, yeah, when we talk about software supply chain security, it's just a massive space right now. And when we think about software supply chain, it's all the way from when the code leaves the developer's keyboard till it lands in production, all the things that it's pulling in, all those dependencies, all the systems used to build it, like all those touch points. And yeah, the reality is there's weaknesses along that entire chain, and people are getting attacked, and we're seeing huge upticks of attacks. So we're trying to make people's lives a bit easier here at Chainguard.
Yeah, got it. Well, thank you. As someone whose life you're probably making easier. Do you think there's something in particular that is driving the supply chain focus from a security perspective? Like, have other things gotten more secure, or is it the complexity of, all of the things that we're now building together to build software, or something else?
Yeah.
Like, is it a confluence of all of those factors?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of those factors, and just having like a term to describe all these attacks that we're seeing now. I know, just the pandemic, everyone moving to online, being forced to move to like online work environments and stuff, meant there was a whole bunch more reliance on other vendored software, other open source software. And so I think like and of course the movement to the cloud, I think all these new sort of touch points and complexity that we're adding to our systems and dependencies are just making the situation a bit more bleaker, a bit more complex. So and like you said, I think we've been doing a good job at getting better other types of attacks. The internet's all encrypted now with HTTPS, and attackers are just looking for the easiest vector in to have massive impact. And so they're kind of taking some unique approaches to these software supply chain attacks, and then having those attacks sort of proliferate in pretty impactful ways.
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So we're this season, of the show, talking about failure a lot.
Fun.
And learning from failure. And well, yeah, failure is fine. I mean, depends on how you reason about it.
But
I love it because it's yeah, exactly. It's where all the learning is. But I think one of the challenges that people have in learning from failure is getting comfortable in the first place with failure. And I feel like security is one of the least comfortable places, partly because there's so much, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what's going on in the world. And just, it feels so nerve-wracking to think, someone's going to get into the system and steal something or whatever. So how do you I guess, push that aside and kind of keep a rational focus and focus on just, continuous improvement and getting better versus, panicking the
Yeah.
sky is falling and just going back to bed?
Great question. We should probably just throw away all of our code. We can start there and just be done. No, but really, I think
Perfect.
so yeah. At Chainguard and I lead product, and at Google I lead product, and product is figuring out kind of customer pain points, challenges, and then going down and breaking down problems from there. So I think, yeah, it's kind of like the best place that I would start, or how I would recommend people starting to think about this problem is like start thinking about the threat landscape and start breaking down, like from your organization, start breaking down the problem from there. Yeah, like I mentioned, I was at Google trying to help Google protect against open source supply chain, open source software. And so it was a concerted effort, and I built like the team at Google with my who now CEO, to help look into the different risks happening just purely from bringing in open source software. So that was one way we sort of broke down the problem at Google. But I think, for a lot of organizations, like if you don't have your own house in order, if you don't feel comfortable about how your own
Hmm.
first party software is being built and shipped to production, if your developers are not using a CircleCI and just building something on their laptop in your machine, like there's a better place that you can start thinking about this. So I think that's what I would kind of say. Just you got to start somewhere. You got to start looking at sort of your own risk assessment, and then be able to break down the problem from there. See if you can prioritize that way. And yeah, and like you said, that we're never going to be perfect. Like security is never solved. I think this is a thing that's just going to keep coming up, and people are going to panic. And like you said, I think we just all need to learn from it and just try to do better.
I think what I like about that perspective is it's just another software problem, right? Like
Yeah,
what we've learned about almost everything in software in the last few decades is find a way to make it smaller,
yeah,
right? Take a first step. You're going to have improvement. That improvement will build to another improvement,
yeah,
like you can't solve the whole thing at once. So just break it down, find ways to partition it, and just start making progress. And one day you wake up and you're like, wow, we've made a ton of progress, but that
yeah,
first day doesn't feel necessarily great. So speaking of learning from failure, though, one of the things that I think is a bit different from the rest of software is often there's some additional risk during investigation around security, like how we talk about it, what we can tell to our customers. I've got an active thing, so I can't actually disclose because then someone else can take advantage of it. Does that
yeah.
change the way that you think about learning from security issues in particular?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. Like, especially when you think about proprietary software, or like where a vendor may not want to be fully transparent about what went wrong. And I think this is where I'm not sure if we talked about on this podcast yet, where things like SBOMs that we call like software bill of materials
Mm.
are going to start to get
Hmm.
really interesting as they kind of take shape, and how people start using them and producing them. And what an SBOM is, or software bill of materials, is basically a nutrition label that's supposed to list out all the different pieces of software that are in this proprietary thing you're shipping. And this was something that came down through the executive order that company or organization selling to government will have to also supply like the software bill of materials. So I think that's like gonna lift a little layer of transparency around some of these things, and make
Hmm.
for some interesting discussions going forward. And I think it's pretty new thing. So like even making sure that data is accurate and and usable is like a whole nother kind of discussion topic that gets interesting. But I think, as a consumer too of vendored software or whatever, you're putting a certain amount of trust in these vendors, and
Hmm.
everything isn't transparent or disclosed. And so I think you're trusting them. There's no real zero trust. You're putting your trust into them to kind of make sure all your data and things are safeguarded. But then on the flip side, like the open source pieces is like interesting too, because then you do have all that transparency. You can technically go look line by line at how an open source project comes together, but no one no one on this planet is
No.
looking at every single code change or understanding how those open source packages got built, or where sometimes they can't even trace them back to where their even source code is coming from. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think what's great about that though and like leaning into kind of what you're working on, is that we will build tooling around these problems, right? Like if everyone has to build a software bill of materials, someone will do a great job of building the tool to generate that, because none of us are capable of sitting down and doing it. And none of us want to spend our time doing that.
Yeah.
On the other hand, with the good tooling, we will now know what's actually running inside of our systems, which I would venture a large number of organizations don't, right? There's, you know, to your point, there's not one person who can reason about an entire system, even just their own internal systems in a lot of cases, to be able to say, yeah, we're in good shape. So that tooling, I think, will push us in a good direction, and allow us to think a little bit more concretely, I guess, about everything that's in our system.
Absolutely. I think the data, along with the tooling, like the data, like it's going to be huge. Like having this body of evidence of trusted data that we've never really had before. Like when we talk about supply chain too, like no one's really capturing that data of how certain artifacts are sort of being built, and having it to be transparent, especially around like open source software and things. So once we start getting like the tooling and all this trusted data that we can make better decisions on, I think we'll have like a lot, we would have made a lot more progress in this problem space.
So, you know, a lot of this is about external components, right? So supply chain could be, you know, people have internal supply chains, teams building things for other teams, but then also we're going to the outside. And I would say, personally, I champion it. Many people do. Like, don't build all the things that don't differentiate you from your competitors. Focus your time and energy on what actually matters to you as a business, right? Like, I don't know, as a security organization, maybe you sat down and wrote your own HTTP stack, but I'm guessing you just took one off the shelf, right? Like, it doesn't feel particularly differentiated. So at that point, you know, we have all of this advantage, right? We have the opportunity to build more advanced systems because we're building on top of things that have already been figured out. But it also exposes us in a way, and sort of as we're talking about, you know, one person being able to reason about the whole thing. Like, do you think that this model has significantly changed our ability to reason about systems, meaning the model of supply chains and being able to get, you know, third-party services, libraries off the shelf? And is it a positive or a negative, or sort of just something you do with caution? I mean, how do you think about the impact on overall system design?
Yeah, let's see if I can get to what you're going at here. But I think like just the uptick in software supply chain attacks, like I said, the new regulation coming down the pipeline, it's impossible for system designers and security execs of the world to kind of ignore now. I think it gives us like just a big opportunity for a lot of education in this space, and like you said, the developer tooling to kind of get a handle on this problem. I think we have a good idea of like the work that needs to get done, but it's a lot of work, and someone's got to do it. Does that kind of get to the?
Well, I'm curious now. Like, so you have an idea, right? And you're talking about education. Well, so what I'm interested in is like the average developer, right, can now say, "Wow, I could build this entire, you know, platform that I'm conceiving of by taking one of these and one of these and one of these and gluing them together with like a little bit of TypeScript or whatever." Yeah. And now I can sign up 100 million users who are now all using my service that I don't even understand. I don't know who built these components. I don't know whether they're secure, whatever. And so is the hard work. Yeah. This wasn't where I was going, but now I'm super fascinated by it. Is the hard work actually figuring out whether the system is secure, or is it in educating developers about the kinds of risks that they're taking by pulling all these pieces together in order to get them to do what might be an easy check, like, hey, is this secure or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above, but probably starting with the education piece, like just basic thing, like what's happening when you're taking that random HTTP stack off the internet. Are you sure you got the right package? And so I think, and I was a developer once before I moved over to product land, and I even studied security in school, and Hadoop was one of the big open source projects that I started using back when there wasn't very many developers, and I actually worked at a nuclear research lab. I downloaded Hadoop not not thinking twice about it. Luckily, we were in, isolated, isolated environments and everything. But like, I mean, even though I studied security in school, it was like a lot of theoretical stuff, and I just didn't apply it like kind of the right, for my day-to-day life, just trying to get features out the door as a developer. So in developers today, like I don't know how much like that shifted, the mentality has shifted, where if I'm trying to build something today, am I thinking about any of that thing when I go pull off an open source package or something? Like how healthy is it? Like who's the maintainer behind it?
Well, you know what's so you said something in there that was super interesting, and it ties back to something you said. Like you mentioned zero trust previously, and then said, "Hey, I worked in this nuclear facility, whatever." I'm mildly nervous, but it didn't matter that my behavior was, unchecked because I was in a sandbox where I couldn't cause any harm. And so, we could spend our lifetimes trying to educate every developer that ever touches software about all the potential security risks, but none of them are going to be well, maybe a few of them will be experts, right? Sure. And we're at this place like in DevOps, and now it's like DevSecOps and DevSec marketing, revenue ops, like
just do it all.
As a developer, I'm like, I just want to build a website, but I have to be responsible for understanding everything. It's too much, right? So now are we expecting one person to understand everything, or can we build a system, right, that basically makes it impossible? I can download libraries off the internet, and if they're not good, they're not going to go into production. They're going to get stopped somehow. And is that, I mean, I may be
that's the direction we're heading with Chainguard. I mean, again, we're a new company, but our mission is to make the software supply chain secure by default. We all have developer kind of tooling backgrounds, and again, back to the developer tooling stuff. If we don't make this stuff easy to use, like no developer is going to use it. And so I think that's really what we're trying to strive for in our solutions and as a company, and then just help with that education piece. Like, this is the thing that you should care about. Here's the attacks that we've seen in the wild. Like here's a way that you can kind of harden that system or think about this a little bit differently. So, but like I said, I think we said in the beginning, there's no complete bulletproof solution here. I think it's a lot of the defense in depth mechanism with security in general. So we can help developers do a little bit better job. Like MFA is a great example right now. There's community effort to try to get maintainers of very popular open source projects just to have multi-factor authentication. And it's a little bit more friction, but shouldn't be enough friction where people are kind of pushing back on doing that.
Yeah, there's the whole point about making it easy for developers. I mentioned before we started that I drove into the city yesterday. I live in Oakland. The city to me is San Francisco. I don't know if people listening to this know that. Anyway, giant billboards on the 101, which is like everybody's sign that they've arrived, right? For Sneak. And like shout out to our friends there, different area of security, but loved by security folks and loved by developers. Their phrasing is better, and now they're going to be sad because I can't remember the exact expression, but that is really what set them apart from so much security tooling, right? Which is what you're describing. Building something that developers are happy to use. The friction is super low. And they're like, oh, if that's what it takes to be secure, I'll totally do that, because the cost to me is very low and I see the value as being high. When it's like, oh, we need you to do this, go fill out this spreadsheet and like integrate all these 15 different tools. People are like, I don't have time for that, right? So I think getting into the developer flow in a way that allows them to your point, have sort of default secure supply chain without putting all the burden on them to understand it or to do a bunch of work really feels like the sweet spot that we're starting to understand now. Like make it easy to do the right thing.
Yep. And I think that make it easy to do the right thing and just a little bit of education so they like understand it and want to do the right thing. And
like a great thing about security is you just need like one horror story, right? Like just help them understand one thing that went horribly wrong, and you'd be like, okay, I'm listening. I'm motivated enough to try it if it's really easy. And my goodness, there are so many good ones out there. The thing about open source that I find particularly interesting, just to tag on that for a second, you mentioned like the friction is, I think this is true for me. I actually recently read this book, Working in Public, which is about open source and open source models, and it really helped me understand all of the different models of open source that are out there, and in terms of the community structures and how people contribute and the work that gets done, and the individual heroes who are carrying entire projects. And so whenever I hear that, oh, it won't be a lot of extra friction for them, I'm just like, oh, I feel so much empathy and so much pain on their behalf in general for the things they're trying to do. That was like, I started out one day and I just thought it would be fun to build this thing. And now I'm supporting half of the internet. And like, I really wish I could have a vacation. And so I love that notion. I think maybe it's on the rest of us. It's shout out to listeners, like, see how you can contribute by maybe helping implement MFA for them. Maybe that's a thing that people could do to contribute to open source projects when they don't even understand the project, right? Is help them deal with some of the, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna pile on there. Like, organizations that are relying on open source software and not doing any contributions back, like, come on.
Yeah, it's not surprising, I guess, if you follow that thread all the way back, that this is a source of problems, right? That there are gaps in security in the open source libraries that we're picking up because the originators have walked away and give it to someone else, or because they haven't implemented best practices everywhere because they're just trying to keep the thing running and like deal with all the, random PRs that they're getting, et cetera. So it's a tough, we're so dependent across the entire software ecosystem on people who in many cases, are very much unsung heroes.
Yeah. And don't be mean to those people, because they're, it's not always their fault. Their volunteer work made your app to cry, I
mean, what a great takeaway and all that. Like, if we could start somewhere, be a decent human being, and then we'll start we'll tack on top of that, like maybe contribute some time, contribute some energy, whatever. But like, let's just start by being nice to
nice.
People who have done like amazing things to help us all get further along in the stuff that we're doing. Awesome. Well, so now's the time. It's story time. So Red Build Rewind. I mean, I just said not to set you up or anything, but I just said there's so many awesome, horrifying security stories. So I'm kind of hoping I get one. But can you tell me about a time that you experienced a failure, maybe felt catastrophic in the moment, but ultimately taught you a valuable lesson and is something that you've been able to carry with you?
Yeah, probably not the most fun story. Definitely not that security related, but I do have one from my time at Google. I spearheaded I was working for Google Cloud, and I spearheaded a whole new product, an email API, because customers wanted to be able to send and receive email. Imagine that. So I said, Google should be able to do that. Customers are asking for it. I poured my heart and soul into that product. I got the customer demand. I did all the things that I thought I needed to do. I got exec sponsorship. I built a team. We had new execs. I had to repitch why we're doing this. All the big company stuff. I got an alpha out the door. Got feedback. Got good feedback and usage. We took time for that feedback. Try to do some work, like try to change the API, try to do some things right. And then 2 weeks before pushing that out the door publicly, exec says we're canceling this project. And I mean, it stung. It stung for a while. And I guess, it may not be the best takeaway that people like want to hear, but like, especially as a product person or building a company, like, listen to your gut, listen to what the customers are asking for. You may have to navigate different situations in strategic ways and just get the thing out the door. I think I learned a bit more about execution. Like, it's not can't always push out the most polished thing in the world. You just gotta push out things, gotta make security a little bit better and keep on iterating and keep on moving forward. So I think that was one of the big valuable lessons for me, that you see this happen, time and time again, that people sort of pour a lot of time into projects and products at their companies and stuff, and ultimately ends up not working out. I think those are hard moments.
Yes, but as we have been focusing on for so long, and as we've been talking about for the last 20 plus minutes, these are the opportunities to learn, right? If it weren't for that, I mean, it's going to happen at some point, I guess, in the earlier and sort of smaller impact cycles that you can learn some of these things in, the better positioned you are. Puts you in a to put my happy positive spin on it, puts you in a fantastic position to go start something and really
Exactly.
be focused on that, right? Like focused on execution, focused on what's the smallest piece of work that I can do, how fast can I learn? That sounds interesting. Can we do it in a quarter of the time? Speaking of Google, when I talk to people starting companies and startups and stuff, my answer is almost always, or my first question is, can you do that with a Google Sheet? Like without building any product at all? Like, can you just build a spreadsheet and email some people and see if they care? Like what is the absolute? And it's like, well, what tech stack should we use? I'm like, you're thinking about the wrong problem. Like, what is the absolute? You should be able to have an answer by this afternoon about whether you're on the right track or not. Build some, some landing pages, whatever that might be. And to learn that on someone else's dime, and I don't mind saying that because I'm pretty sure Google has a few of my dimes, and they can afford to lose a few. Like, that's great, right? It's a great opportunity to have. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Hopefully some folks will take that away and they can skip going through the process.
Skip some pain.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. Thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, if you enjoy what we're talking about, subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. If there's anybody you want us to talk to, anything you want us to talk about, find us on Twitter at CircleCI. Kim, thanks again for joining me. Appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.